Welcome to Taliesin's map, and today I'm going to go through what appears to be the source of the burning bush scene from Exodus 3. And so this is continuing with our parallels found in Indian texts specifically. But for this particular scene, we have quite a strong parallel when it is seen in the right context. I'm just going to share the link to this stream and we will get started. Okay, so one thing that I like about comparative mythology is that sometimes a parallel kind of doesn't need explanation. It's really about somebody just reading the passage for themselves, and the parallel explains itself. It becomes obvious. And I feel like that is true for this particular parallel more than some others, perhaps. But it also requires understanding in context of the other parallels we have discussed. So let's see. So this is continuing with um, the set of parallels that I laid out related to Dadhichi specifically. So to recap, my thesis is that Moses is mainly, and this is just mainly because he's composited from multiple sources. So there's no one or two sources that are going to completely explain him, but Moses is primarily composed from um, the stories of the sages Vasishta and Vishvamitra that we touched on in yesterday's stream. And that involves the parting of the sea, as well as the turning of waters to blood and the sort of retaliation that Moses does for the striking of a Hebrew and him having to retreat, specifically when he retreats to rural Midian after that and sees God. That all relates to Dadhichi, as well as many of the plagues seem to be paralleled by the terrible omen signs that Virabhadra brings to the sacrifice of Daksha, that Dadhichi is the one protesting at. So first of all, we have from the Shiva Purana, just to give a reference, we can see that these parallels I'm going to bring up are from the same text, essentially. And, that just means from the same textual tradition anciently, but this is the text that has come down to us, and we can find these parallels in one and the same text, which makes it all the more striking. So, the destruction of Daksha's sacrifice. So yeah, Dadhichi is the one who has a vision of Shiva on the mountain, and he's like he's the dedicated, righteous loyal sage, loyal worshiper of Shiva, and he goes to the sacrifice of Daksha and protests it and says that this is illicit. This should not be allowed. Um, and he basically leaves angrily from the sacrifice. He's the only one who speaks out against it, just as Moses does. Um, and as I said, he is in a confrontation with the king, as Moses is with the Pharaoh. But in his back and forth with the king earlier in the story, he strikes the king himself, and this causes him to have to uh, run away for temporarily to the woods, just as Moses runs to rural Midian and then has a vision of Yahweh in the burning bush, right? Well, in the Shiva Purana, Dadhichi has to run away to the woods, and immediately there, after speaking to one other figure, as also interestingly, Moses, encounters Jethro, as well as the angel of the Lord being kind of the gateway figure to the burning bush that's mentioned. We also find that when Dadhichi goes to the woods, he has a vision of Shiva there, but right before that, he encounters Shukra. Shukra is a stand-in. He is an emissary of Shiva, essentially. But he's also said to be um, a relative of Dadhichi. So it kind of puts this Shukra in a position similar to the angel of the Lord that um, introduces Moses to the bush, as well as kind of similar to Jethro. But the point is, there's this second figure here, and in this encounter with Shiva, Dadhichi receives 3 boons from Shiva that specifically aid him in his ongoing feud with the king. Just like Moses receives special powers, and they're powers essentially from Shiva in this appearance that he uses in his ongoing battle with the Pharaoh. Moses receives the ability to turn his hand leprous and then heal it, back and forth. He receives the power to, I believe, turn water to blood in that moment, and also to have an assurance that that he will be kind of guided, and promised to go to Canaan. And Dadhichi receives a power of turning his bones adamantium. So adamantine bones, impossibility of being killed, and absence of distress. So those are kind of reassurances, as well as like a more magical power of turning his bones adamantine. So the point is, this scene clearly parallels well with the Moses burning bush scene, where Yahweh gives these things to Moses, these powers, and then they both go back and continue their feud with the king or pharaoh. In that feud, Dadhichi, at one point, there's a divine onslaught between the powers of Vishnu, which are sided with the king, and the powers of Shiva that he is sided with. He is, they're having their own gods fight the battle with each other, essentially, the divine powers that they represent, or that they are allied with. And Dadhichi makes a sign of a trident over himself, kind of in the air, with using a handful of kusha grass. So it's a shrubby grass, and it is also sacred grass that is used in sacrifices and things. And he makes this 3-stroke trident symbol over himself and it protects it. It guards him from the divine onslaught of Vishnu that is being directed towards them. and it also like scares away all the opponent gods, including it drives them away. It's so powerful. It is like the presence of Shiva that he puts over himself. Um, Interestingly, of course, one of the things Moses does to guard against the divine onslaught that is happening is the using the hyssop, using another shrubby grass. Hyssop um, does a 3-stroke application of the sheep's blood over the doorposts of all the Israelites, and that makes this protection from the terrible divine onslaught. So another interesting detail that aligns these scenes. However, in Moses's in the appearance of Shiva to Dadhichi, rather, in the woods that he retreats to, there is no sort of burning bush analog. So I found that interesting, which is why I never, compared that directly to the burning bush. It is just Dadhichi has to do a mantra and meditate. Shukra teaches him a mantra when he goes to the woods. He has to meditate using this mantra, and then it causes Shiva to appear to him, gives him these boons. But what I realize is this is one of the main sort of theophanies, manifestations of Shiva within this Shiva Purana. But there is a second, even more prominent manifestation, theophany of Shiva in this same Shiva Purana and throughout the Puranas. And it could be, maybe even the most famous scene of the whole Shiva Purana, potentially. It's one of them. It is the most dramatic and famous theophany of Shiva, essentially. And it is him appearing within in overwhelming blazing fire. So I realized that, well, okay, they have this structure where Dadhichi goes and has Shiva manifest to him, but we have this separate scene in the very same book, in the very same Purana, of Shiva manifesting in a blazing fire in an awe-inspiring, terrifying way. So what if those were just conflated together into one scene? It's a very simple thing to do. The only thing, of course, is that it's not a burning bush. So that's another reason I didn't draw the connection before. But what's amazing is when you look at this other scene, which is Shiva appearing in the blazing, transcendent Lingam in the Shiva Purana and other Puranas, when you look at this scene itself, it appears to have the same details as the actual burning bush scene. Many of the other, the way the scene is presented, and many of the other details align uncannily. So with that, I want to just read through these passages, and like I said, I think it becomes apparent with that framing that that they had this basic concept of the plot that I described, but then a separate theophany of fire of Shiva in the same book, where they just had circled that to combine into one scene, which would be the central theophany of Shiva. So with that, I'll pull this up. Give me one moment. Pull up the text here. And okay, can we do? And again, so this is within a separate story from the Dadhichi one in the Purana. So again, that's another detail to be aware of. It's and another detail that made me not draw the connection at first, because this is within a famous story where it's actually Brahma, the god, and Vishnu, the god, and they are competing with one another about who is the greatest, who is the all transcendent Godhead. And, they're kind of telling each other how great they are, and they start to have a fight with one another. They are battling one another, and the destruction from their fight with one another is threatening to destroy the cosmos, the universe. And so, right at that moment, Shiva manifests as this burning lingam, which is a phallic column, pillar image, symbol, famously, a sort of sometimes referred to as an aniconic icon. It's this, anyways, it's a very mystical symbol. Linga often translated as phallus, or but also as sign or mark. Sometimes one side of that meaning is more emphasized, and sometimes the other side is preferred. In any case, that is the image. That is this blazing column of fire, and there is some element where it is an image of Shiva's phallus that he also, in another place, severs, and it goes burning through the cosmos. And it is this intimately tied symbol to Shiva, where Shiva is himself the pillar, the column, sthanu, when he meditates, and also this blazing phallus or blazing sign of himself, the linga. It appears in the cosmos, goes through the cosmos, etc. So when that blazing pillar of fire essentially appears to Brahma and Vishnu, they say, "What is this?" And they try to reach the top and bottom of it. They want to sort of race to the top and bottom. One goes up, one goes to the bottom to see who can do so. And Brahma lies about being able to reach the top. Neither one of them can reach top or bottom, but Brahma lies about it. And then Shiva appears out of the lingam, manifesting, and confronts them, and all this other, and some things like that, and speaks of himself as the transcendent God, and then chastises and humbles Brahma, and rewards Vishnu for being honest. And there are some theological elements to that. But the point is, when you just when you just take the core of that, when Shiva manifests and speaks out of the fiery theophany to Brahma and Vishnu, the things he says and the things that they do in response are very much, you could say, they're almost the same as what Moses does, and what the burning bush do in that fiery theophany. So I think the point we'll get across if we go through these texts. So from the Shiva Purana, and I've just the ... is just me removing where he goes on and on about how all his transcendent, he goes at a more lengthy speech about his transcendent aspects, Shiva does, and things like that. And so that's essentially, I'm showing you the core pieces that parallel uncannily to the Moses episode. So from the Shiva Purana, quote, "The bodiless form of Shiva assumed the terrific form of a huge column of fire in their midst. Seeing that auspicious, wonderful phenomenon, assuaging the weapons, they asked each other, 'What is this wonderful form? What is this column of fire that has risen up? It is beyond the range of senses.'" Okay, so already we have it's appearing in their midst. They have this reaction to it, and it is also described beyond the range of senses. It has a transcendent referent. Okay, so it is a symbol of an embodiment of a transcendent deity. Now, the key points in the Moses scene, if you're not aware of them, are that Moses, the angel of the Lord appeared to Moses in flames of fire from within a bush, Moses saw that, though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up, right? So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals and place, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. I am the God of your father. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. So that's another key point. And then he goes on about seeing their misery. So these kinds of things I think are not part of the things about the misery of the Israelites and their mission and their promised land. Those have been added in my theory. Okay, so that goes along with it. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" God said, "I will be with you." And then he asks, Moses asks, what is his name? What is God's name that he should tell to the people? God said to Moses, I am who I am, or Ehya, Esher, Ehya, of course. And I am who I am, or I will be who I will be. This is what you say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. And then God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites that Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, etc. So he tells him both that his name is Ehya, Esher, Asher, Ehya, Asher, Ehya, and Yahweh back to back there. But interestingly, he has this three-word version of what he calls himself that he first speaks. Ehya, Asher, Ehya, as well as the Tetragrammaton, which is a four-letter version, of course. But what we find in the Shiva Purana are many of these things. So if you keep those things in mind, the way they react to seeing the fire, the way he reacts to seeing the fire, their fear, Moses' fear, and sort of questioning himself, and then also the speaking of his name, his mystical name, in a symbolic three-part way out of this fiery theophany. So Brahma and Vishnu say, back to the Shiva Purana, what is this column of fire that has risen up? It is beyond the range of senses. So again, Moses says, what is, he questions, I will go over and see this strange sight, why this bush doesn't burn up. So he has this reaction of seeing, what is this? Of course, an obvious sort of reaction. The world is in the form of linga, says Shiva. Everything is founded on linga. Hence, if the linga is installed, everything is installed. The unmanifest is called the linga. It is the source of attributes, as well as that wherein the universe merges and dissolves. It has neither beginning nor end. It is the material cause of the universe. It is the Maya, the Mula Prakriti, as extensive as the firmament. This universe, including the mobile and immobile beings, is born of that. And so that is a short version of what he says, which essentially tells us that the linga is all existence, is all being, and he is the God who is the linga. So it is equivalent to what Yahweh says, that he is, I am what is, or I am what will be. I am, Ehya, Asher, Ehya is usually interpreted as meaning that he is somehow related to being itself, embodying being, or what will be. And that is exactly how Shiva pronounces about himself, but in a more extended way, that he is all existence and beyond, transcending it, the manifest and unmanifest. In order to dispel their arrogance and to enlighten them, the wonderful linga of the Lord appeared in between them. It had thousands of flames. It was incomprehensible and incomparable. It did not increase or decrease. It had no beginning, no middle, no end. So one of the main things that Moses comments on is that the bush is burning, but it is not consumed. What this Purana comments on, and multiple of the versions of the Purana, of this story in different Puranas comment on, is that the fire of the linga does not increase or decrease. You could see how that specific detail, this fire does not increase or decrease, could be translated into the bush in the fire does not burn up. It is not changing. It is somehow an unchanging supernatural fire that has no, it doesn't behave naturally by increasing or decreasing or consuming what it has. So that would match with the fire does not consume the burning bush. Brahma and Vishnu were enchanted by thousands of flames. Ceasing from their fight, they began to think, what is this? When they could not understand the reality, they attempted to survey its beginning and end. And that's when they try to go to the top and bottom and are unable. So then they were completely perplexed and stared at each other with a smile of shame. Deluded by the Maya of Shiva, they did not know what to do or what not to do. So they are overawed and confused even by this situation, which reminds us of kind of the way Moses is, and he wants to go over and see the strange sight and understand it, but he can't really. They stood in front, at the back, and on other sides of it, and bowed. They began to think, of what nature is this? So again, kind of similar to Moses just says in a couple phrases what they say in a few different lines here. Thinking about what nature is this? Moses says, why? Let's go. I want to go over and see why this is behaving this way. Then there manifested the single syllable Brahman in the characteristic way of a word with its sound Om. It expressed the Brahman. So there manifests out of this fiery pillar or lingam the single syllable Aum, which is identical with Brahman, the transcendent deity in Hinduism, that Shiva is being presented. Shiva is being presented as Brahman, of course, as the transcendent absolute. And it is this sound of Aum, this word that embodies it, manifests out of this fiery lingam. In other versions that I might go show after this, it is more like it vibrates out of the pillar itself. But in any case, Om, as we will see, is actually a three-letter form, a three-letter word, Aum, that represents the absolute Brahman. It's like the name or word of the absolute. So that is broken down here. That too was incomprehensible to Brahma and Vishnu because their minds had been screened with Rajas and Tamas. Then that syllable divided itself into four, the three matras Aum and half the matra thereafter. The letter, so it divides itself into four, but is really a three-letter word, Aum. But there is this half a matra thereafter that makes it a little more complicated. The letter A attached itself to the southern side of the blazing linga, the letter U to the north, and the letter Ma to its middle. At the outset, Shiva creates the universe saying Om. Shiva is Pranava, and Pranava is Shiva. That is because there is not much of difference between that which is expressed and the expression. Rudra is devoid of thought. The words, along with the mind, recede without reaching him. He is that which is expressed by the single syllabled Om. The letter A expressed Brahma, the letter U, Vishnu, the letter Ma expresses Shiva. The three are the causes of the universe. Shiva, the source of the three, is the great cause. And then Shiva says directly, so that was just a descriptive passage within the Purana talking about what's happening. But then Shiva says himself right here also, thus they call me Om, which is the same. It can be written in English as Om, but it is this three-letter actually mystical word for the absolute, Aum. So Shiva himself, after not only does the pillar vibrate out Aum as its symbol of its transcendent word that represents the Brahman, but then Shiva speaks directly to them saying, thus they call me Om, which is this three-letter. Again, what Yahweh speaks from the burning bush is a three-word breakdown, of of his name, or version of his name, however you want to say it, Ehye, Asher, Ehye. And that is seeming to imply I am what is, I am what will be, I am that I am. It connects to being, the embodiment of the transcendent totality of being and beyond. And that just is exactly what Shiva is doing here. And he does so in a three, it's this triplicity that is the same between them. Shiva with three letters that break, but these three letters break down into further theological. Each one stands for different words or different mantras or different deities, even. But Shiva combines them in a totality, and they are his name. Yahweh says the three words Ehye, Asher, Ehye, that name himself. And then, but it's interesting to me also that there's this double statement of his name, because the descriptive passage says that the Aum, the three-letter Aum, vibrates out from the pillar of fire, and right after that, Shiva reiterates from his own mouth, so to speak, "Thus they call me Aum," saying what they call me. And again, from Exodus, we have sort of double the Yahweh speaking twice back to back about his name in two slightly different ways. God says to Moses, Ehye, Asher, Ehye, this is what you're to say to the Israelites, I am has sent me. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, has sent me to you. Okay, so I think that is pretty clear, and we'll just continue from there. Brahma and Vishnu joined the palms in reverence above their heads and spoke thus in fright to the Lord. Oh, of what avail is this submission? O Lord, I am extremely afraid because I have endeavored to determine your size when in fact you cannot be gauged. Moses, of course, he's bemused, of course, and but he's also afraid. It says that when when Yahweh speaks to him first and tells him to take off his sandals and says, I am the God of your father. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And again, we have Brahma and Vishnu join the palms in reverence above their heads and spoke in fright to the Lord and said, I am extremely afraid because I have endeavored to determine your size. Also, what avail is this submission? And that is also kind of reiterating that they are expressing their limitedness. Why they're saying here, why even submit? Of what avail, of what use is this submission? Even submitting, we can't even gauge you. We can't even do that properly. In a way, is what they're saying. And Moses, of course, when asked by Yahweh to take his message, speaks of his own limitedness and inability to perform what Yahweh wants sufficiently. So, saying, let's see. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? So it's the same attitude, is my point, throughout. They're in fear, and they're also commenting aloud on their own inability, limitedness, expressing, who am I to do what even this, whatever is going on, but it's different in both cases, same attitude. Shiva then says, I shall give you everything as before, together with my behest, since without that you cannot create or sustain. So he's speaking to Brahma or Brahma and Vishnu about, giving them the divine powers to even create and sustain as gods. After telling Vishnu and Brahma thus, the Lord gave them the principal mantra along with the Jnana Samhita. After obtaining the divine order of the Lord, the jewel or of mantra pregnant with meaning, and the kalas, they prostrated at the feet of the Lord. They stood without fear, they were overpowered by joy. Ever since that, Indra and the other gods, asura sages, men, serpents, as well as women, install lingas in accordance with the injunctions and worship him in the linga. So Shiva gives boons to them, including a mantra, which allows them to have power to create and sustain. He actually rewards them for, and gives them powers that are a behest to go forth and carry on his work, which is to create create things in the world. In the same way, Moses is given this behest that he is the one to go forth and do the work of Yahweh, which is more specific to him and is the Israelites, of course. And yeah, to carry the name of Yahweh with him and to fulfill that mission. But once again, it is aligned very similarly. Also, of course, it ends with Shiva, with Shiva sort of giving the linga in a smaller version of it to install in homes as or rather to install in accordance with injunctions and to worship the linga. And linga itself means phallus or sign/mark. So oftentimes it's just people want to define it as just meaning sign or mark itself. It is the sign or mark of the deity. And and in the Exodus passage, Yahweh says, that you will come. He mentions the worship that will go on. You will worship on this mountain afterwards, and also let's see. I'm trying to find this passage, but I know Yahweh mentions it being a sign. Okay, so in verse 12 of Exodus 3, God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Okay, so that is similar to the injunction to worship in this specific way that he's giving them, with a symbol of the linga itself that had manifested on the mountain. And the word linga itself means or can mean sign. So that's quite interesting in verse 12 of Exodus 3. In Linga Purana, it's rather similar, but I will just read through some of this. In the meantime, a brilliant linga, so this is Linga Purana, a different version of the same myth. In the meantime, a brilliant linga appeared in front of us. So this is spoken from Vishnu and Brahma. Appeared in front of us in order to suppress our dispute and enlighten us. It had thousands of clusters of flame. It was comparable to hundreds of all-consuming fires. It was stable with no decline or increase. Again, fire of the burning bush does not consume. It had neither a beginning nor an end nor a middle. It was incomparable, inexplicable, and indistinct. It was the source of the universe. Lord Vishnu was deluded by its 1,000 flames. Lord Vishnu was also tired. So this is Brahma speaking, as you can see. His fear was evident in his eyes. He, the origin of all devas, immediately came up there. We bowed to Lord Shiva. The noble-minded Vishnu was deluded by Shiva's Maya, and he stood there in mental dejection. We bowed to Lord Shiva at the sides, behind and in front, and wondered what that was. O great devas! Then a loud sound, Om, issued out of the column. It was clearly a prolated sound or extended, stretched sound. So you can see there, I liked that version of the statement in this Purana because it's more clear that this is issuing, the sound Om is issuing directly out of the column. Om is a mystical syllable consisting of 3 sounds, A-U-M. It is the object of profound religious meditation. The highest spiritual efficacy is attributed not only to the whole word, but also to each sound separately. Again, you see Yahweh saying his name is Yahweh, but then breaking his name down into 3 parts, Ehya, Asher, Ehya. Same concept. The highest, thinking what it could be, Vishnu stood there together with me. Then he saw the eternal first letter A on the right-hand side of the linga. Then on the left, the letter U. Thereafter, the letter M. In the middle, and the vibratory tone in the end. That tone was Om. Rudra is free from anxieties and worry. Speech recedes along with the mind, being unable to attain him. He is expressible through the single syllable Om, which is the divine order, the supreme cause, truth, bliss, nectar, the supreme Brahman, greater than the greatest. Out of that single syllable Om, the syllable A is Brahma, U Vishnu, and M is Rudra. A is the cause of creation, U of illusion, and M of bliss. On seeing the great Lord, along with Uma, his consort, Vishnu bowed and then looked up at him. He saw a mantra emerging from Om with 5 digits. Resembling pure crystal, it contained 38 syllables. It was conducive to the increase of knowledge, and it was the means of achievement of all righteous matters. He saw the Rik of 24 syllables and 4 digits in Gayatri meter. With efficacy of gaining control. He saw another mantra with its efficacy of black magic. He saw the Yajus mantra with efficacy of peace. He saw Saman mantra with the efficacy for creation and dissolution of the universe. Having attained these 5 mantras, Lord Vishnu performed japa. He saw Lord Shiva in all digits and syllables, constituting the limbs with body consisting of Rik, Yajus, and Saman. So again, there they receive specifically mantras, powers, empowerments from the Linga, from the Om, which are powers to create the universe and bring peace and other things, as well as black magic, interestingly enough, which is more similar to the things that Moses does in terms of turning his hand leprous and not leprous is more aligned with that. But anyways, that's probably a different connection. In any case, since the phallic emblem rose high, resembling a mountain of fire, this shall be famous as ruddy or Arunya mountain. And okay, so that was interesting because the phallic emblem, that is the linga, it is also identified, it is also described as an sort of never-ending pillar of fire, but it is also here in this mention said to resemble a mountain of fire as well, and that mountain of fire resemblance causes this place that they're at to be called Arunya Mountain. So again, that ties it more to Mount Horeb or what have you in the story of Moses, and the concept that this linga also connects to mountain imagery and being on the mountain, and also giving the mountain its name. Okay, so that was interesting to note. Also, I wanted to point out that in the Linga Purana, in the Puranas themselves, as I think in the Shiva Purana as well, but in any case, there are extensive instructions of purificatory steps you have to take to approach the Linga. And so this was important because one of the key points in the Exodus scene is that God says, take off your sandals because the place you are walking is holy ground, essentially. When he is approaching this burning Theophany, this burning bush, he has to take off his sandals. It is a sort of simple but classic step taken for basic purificatory preparation for ritual in certain ritual situations and that sort of thing. In the Shiva material, there are more involved and detailed descriptions of how to purify oneself to approach the worship of the linga. So we have that part connected to the linga, is my point, but it is more extensive. I shall briefly mention the rules of procedure for the worship of linga. The Purana says it is not possible to recount them in detail, even in 100 years. After bathing, thus, so you have to bathe, take 3 pranayamas and meditate on the three-eyed Lord. He shall resort to the form of the deity as follows. And then after purifying the body, he shall perform the rite in the highly splendid aphorism Namah Shivaya. The Vedas are present in subtle form, just as a holy fig tree is present in the subtle seed. Also, the great Brahman is present in the great and splendid aphorism, all by himself in a subtle form. The devotee shall sprinkle the place of worship with scented sandal water and concentrate the materials of worship either by washing or sprinkling water, etc. After worshipping thus, he shall enter the sanctum sanctorum of Lord Shiva. He shall then offer handfuls of flowers on the 5 heads of the Lord, repeating the 5 mantras with different kinds of incense. After perceiving thus through their imagination that the elegances of Rudra are present everywhere, and Rudra, of course, is Shiva, the sages who perceive the truth say everything is Rudra. By making incessant obeisance to Brahma, one's prestige is increased. All this is Brahman. Everything is Lord Rudra. Purusha is the great Lord. Shiva is the supreme Lord. Okay, that gets the point across. And then Skanda Purana has a version as well. O Aparna, I shall describe to you the story how the Omkara Linga manifested itself here. So this is actually a version where it's not two gods, but just Brahma himself, which reminded me a little bit more of just the single Moses. So for that reason, I'll just quickly go through this. Listen, formerly here in Anandavana, O great goddess, a great penance was performed with very intensive concentration by Brahma, the creator of the universe. When 1,000 yugas passed, a supreme radiance sprang up in front of him, piercing the 7 netherworlds and illuminating the faces of all quarters. This is also interesting because it says emphatically right at the beginning of this description that it is piercing. It is something that is piercing, and I will touch on this right afterwards. But the linga, the word linga, of course, means phallus, but there is a synonym of phallus used in classical Vedic terminology. There's little to none use of the word linga in the older texts, that is to say. But there is the use of a different word that is a synonym for it called Shishna. And yeah, so Shishna is used, for example, in the Shatapatha Brahmana to describe in ritual preparation the pestle, and with the mortar and pestle, and the pestle is the phallic, symbolically, male versus the mortar is the female, and so if I have that correct, but in any case, you have this sort of symbolic phallus being described as the Shishna, and Shishna just means penis or phallus, and in the Rig Veda, that is the word used for penis or phallus. It is mentioned in a negative context in the Rig Veda, which may or may not be connected to worshippers who use this as a religious symbol. It's unclear. And so the point is, there is this synonym, Shishna, and I'll go into this more, but Shishna comes from a root word meaning to pierce, okay? And it is actually the word used more commonly in the text from the classical Vedic period, whereas linga seems to be traced more to later Puranic times, okay? Of course, I'm reading from the Purana here, but these could be later versions, or in any case, the words can be synonyms of each other and are interchangeable to a certain degree. Shishna and linga. The root word of Shishna means something to pierce. And so this linga here is emphasized that it is piercing. All right, and we'll come back to this. That same brilliance which had originally manifested itself within himself, due to his genuine concentration, presented itself before Brahma. On account of the crackling and splitting sound that arose from the ground, Brahma, who had good control over the senses, gradually came back from samadhi. Even as the creator, Brahma, ceased to meditate and gradually opened his eyes and looked before him, he saw the first letter, A, endowed with sattva quality. It is the cause of Rigveda and the protector of the creation, is identical with Narayana, and is established beyond all darkness. Thereafter he saw the letter U beyond it, having the Rajas form. It is the source of Yajurveda. It was the creator of everything. It was his own reflected form. Beyond it he saw the letter M, resembling the abode of tryst, of silent darkness, especially with Tamas form. It was the source of Samaveda and the cause of dissolution. It has Rudra's form. Then in front of him, the meditator Brahma saw the cosmic form of Shabda Brahman, sound absolute. Endowed with and without attributes, it was the abode of Anakyanada, para, the subtlest sound. It was the embodiment of the supreme bliss. It is well known as Shabda Brahman. It is the cause of all verbal utterance. Okay, and Brahma saw this due to the power of his penance. He's doing penance. It is well known as Om because it protects and because it raises up the devotee by its power. It is formless and also endowed with form. It was seen by the creator, Brahma. It is also well known as Taraka because it redeems persons whose mind is engrossed in the contemplation of and japa of itself. Brahma saw that. It is glorified as Pranava because it is ardently eulogized by those who are desirous of the great salvation. Hence, it is greater than everything else. It is also called Pranava because it leads one to who resorts to it toward the greatest region, moksha. Hence, Brahma perceived that quiescent Pranava. That Lord Mahadeva was seen by Brahma, the Lord who had four horns, the four Vedas, 7 hands, 2 heads, and 3 feet. That in which the entire thing, the past, the future, and the present, became dissolved again and again. That seed, the cause of all, but itself having no cause, was seen by Druhina, Brahma. That linga was seen where the receptacle of everything from Brahma to a blade of grass is dissolved and is being sought, and therefore is honored by all good people. You are A, you are U, and you are M, constituting Om. O Lord, devoid of form in reality, obeisance to you, the embodiment of Rik, Yaju, and Sama Vedas, and in reality, beyond all forms, obeisance to you in the form of nada, the sound termed para, pasyanti, madhyama, and vaikari, obeisance to one in the form of the part of bindu, obeisance to one identical with the visible and the invisible, to one identical with all forms. So that was just a great version of this speech. Obviously these are just versions of one another, but there he specifically says that you are that in which the past, the future, and the present become dissolved, and also the seed and the cause of all these things. That is very similar to what Yahweh says in terms of I am Ehya, Asher, Ehya. I am what is, or I am what will be. I embody being and am somehow transcendent to it. And then also, I am invisible. I am identical with the visible, invisible, and all forms. So again, just emphasizing that same thing. Then Brahma says, "You are my refuge. You alone, the ultimate goal. O Lord, I bow down to you alone. I bow down to you. Obeisance, obeisance." After saying this, Brahma bowed down to Maheshvara many times. He prostrated himself like a log of wood on the ground before the Lord named Pranava in the form of great linga. Though I am formless, I assumed the form of Shankara and emerged from that linga. I spoke to the four-faced Lord. I am delighted. Tell me what boon you will have. The four-faced one, on seeing him, seeing me directly, got up, said again, be victorious, and bowed down with palms joined in reverence. Tears welled up in his eyes. He had horripilation due to excess of delight. Okay, if a boon is given to me, then, O Shankara, may your presence be in this great linga. This boon alone should be granted. I do not choose any other boon. So he asks only for the presence in the linga that he can then install or use in worship within the world. So it is the giving of this symbol that will then be used in worship as in the other. And he's also given other boons as in the other versions. So the point is, and then finally he says, you will be grandfather of all. You will be worthy of everyone's honor. It is to bestow the benefit of your penance that this linga has sprung up. So that is what Shiva says at the end. And so it is very similar to Moses, or even when Yahweh makes Abraham the father of all. But you will be the grandfather of all. It's this similar bestowal to these patriarch figures that we see in the Bible. One last interesting thing is that in the Vayu Purana, it begins with this. So a well-established flame, that is to say a stable, solid, well-established is like probably a word relating to sthanu or something, that it is stable as in the other versions. On seeing that flame, we too were surprised. By that splendor, all the waters sparkled. When that excessively surprising and mysterious flame began to increase inside Brahma, and I hastened toward the flame. The massive column of flame stood touching heaven and earth. In the midst of it, we saw the unmanifest linga of excessive brilliance, highly illuminated, and of the size of Pradesha, the distance between the thumb and little finger. So a small linga, as apparently, appears. So an unmanifest small. So it's like this transcendent essence of the linga that is tiny somehow, or symbolically tiny. It's hard to conceptualize, something hard to conceptualize, but is like the essence, the unmanifest essence of the linga appears in the midst of the flaming column. What is so interesting about this, I don't know if anyone will know where I'm going with this, but famously, the Yahweh in the Moses burning bush scene speaks out from in the midst of the bush. Essentially, I think there is a phrase where he appears in the midst of the bush, essentially. So it's similar phrasing, and you'll have to probably look that up and see if that seems similar to you, if you can do that. So yeah, there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flames of fire from within a bush. So depending on the translation, of course. Okay, so yeah, let's see. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Yeah, so there may or may not be a similarity there that's worth noting, but I do think, regardless, it's this similar image. Once again, he's frightened. All of these things. This is important as well because the Vayu Purana is believed by some scholars to be one of the oldest because it's mentioned in the Mahabharata, as well as having references to things that are more archaic, and it has the potential to trace back to 2nd century, 3rd century BC times. And of course, if that's even a question, we can see that all of these Puranas are coming from some shared source, even though nobody really knows how they branched apart. And that I've shown in my work, many of the Purana stories absolutely go back to Proto-Indo-European because they appear in analog versions in European stories quite uncannily and to a high degree that would be unexpected. So, there is a through line that can be established and discussed, but it is interesting that there's a version of this in the Vayu Purana. The Shiva Purana and the Vayu Purana at one point were believed to be part of one or broken off from one, and now that has been critiqued and is not exactly what they think happened. But we can see with our own eyes that they obviously come from a shared, what would be just a Shiva Purana, a Shaivite tradition of Puranas, plural, which was just an oral tradition of these stories, clearly, at some point, and that they broke off into these variants. So that's important for me to get across as well. Okay. Okay. So I think that this parallel, again, sort of establishes itself on its own strength when you just read the text and understand how this can be. They took this theophany and just overlaid it or combined it with the moment where Dadhichi causes Shiva to manifest to himself in the middle of his feud with the king when he retreats to the woods. So they kind of just made one ultimate theophany moment of God, right? And it's right there. That's what makes this so clear, is that these are in the very same book or books. You'll have you have the Daksha story with Dadhichi, um, and then you'll have the story with the linga appearing, the fiery linga, and that is just, you can't read the Shiva Purana or any of these Puranas without knowing the story of the fiery manifestation of the linga. It is the most awe-inspiring Shiva manifestation. It is the most awe-inspiring kind of moment, probably in the whole Purana. So obviously, if someone was working with this material, they would have it circled. They would know it, and it is obviously the closest thing to what we see of the burning bush. The only things that kind of make it hard to understand that is that it is taken out of its context of the Brahma Vishnu competition. That is the part of the story that's kind of famous. It's just taken out of that context. But you can see in that version where it's just Brahma, that is a version where it is out of that context, where I showed you, where the one where Brahma himself just meditates and causes the Omkara, which is the Om. It's the same thing. It is the pillar, a fire story with the linga in a different permutation, and it's just one deity, but the same things happen. You then have the name of God pronounced out of it. You literally have Shiva saying, "I am known as, I am the Om." He says his name in the first person, as well as it emanating in a three-letter way that symbolizes transcendent reality and the absolute. You have the penitent, frightened, bemused figures who see this manifestation acting in very similar ways, and they're given a behest. The linga, or the burning bush sign, whatever, a sign is, something is given as a sign, essentially, to them, that will also connect to a future worship in both cases, Moses and the gods in the other version, in the Shaivite version. So yeah, you can see that it's almost, to me, it's almost just incredible that I've never seen, on a quick Google, I've never seen these compared before. Probably just the context makes it seem different when you have the competition of the gods and other things. The other thing that makes it seem different is the bush image itself. Obviously, in the Shaivite version, it is a burning column, a flaming transcendent column, which is also a symbolic transcendent lingam, a phallus, aka sign, or phallus and sign, and that is different than a burning bush. So they're different. But I'm still surprised that no one has seen how identical the actual presentation of the theophany is in the ways I've pointed to. So it's kind of mind-blowing in that sense. But there are reasons to, I think that this parallel is established on its own merits, just with what I've said so far. And but I think we can also speculate about the bush imagery itself. So I will try to separate what I've said so far with the speculation, because some people will disagree with the speculation, but I think it's possible that there were things about the lingam itself, the linga itself, and its name and what it does, that could have shaped or suggested to the Exodus authors the word for the burning bush, and that there could be an actual through line, even though they appear to us differently. There could be a through line there. So this gets a bit complicated. So let me just take a second to get my documents in order. Okay, so the most simple explanation for why it would be a bush, and I would not fault anyone for taking this explanation. It may be what happened, is just that there is a certain degree of embarrassment about the phallic symbolism that the people adapting this material to the Exodus scene were uncomfortable with the symbol of the lingam, and so found a symbol that they were comfortable with, which was a bush instead of a lingam that is not consumed, a phallus that is not consumed, and that the fire does not increase or decrease. It is a bush where the fire does not consume. Okay, that may be what simply happened, and that the bush is just what was chosen. Um, but as I pointed out, it's described emphatically as the lingam is described emphatically as piercing when it appears. It has the classical synonym for lingam is shishna, and that comes from a root word which means something that pierces. Okay, um, it is shishna, shishna. What we have in the case of the word used for the burning bush is a word sneh or senne. Okay, so let's see, in an English transliteration, it would be seneh, right? So really, what is said in the Exodus passage is that out of a senna, um, God spoke. A burning senna, or the angel of the Lord spoke. A burning senna appears, or senna appears to Moses in this moment. Nothing about the description of the burning senna in the actual Exodus passage um, denotes that it is clearly a bush. There's no description of its leaves or anything like that. It is just that said that the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a seneh. Moses saw that though the seneh was on fire, it did not burn up. Okay, that would equally apply to if you said linga right there. Moses, Brahma saw that though the linga was on fire, the flames did not increase or decrease. Okay, or the flames were stable, did not burn up. Similar concepts. So nothing actually is making it explicit that this is a bush. And unfortunately, I'm not a scholar of the languages here, so I'm going to have a hard time getting this across. Just speaking about it rather than writing this down. So I will have to put this in writing in the future in a more detailed way. But what is interesting is that the word senne actually comes from a root word meaning to prick. Okay, in a literal sense, it doesn't have the word bush in it. Okay, do you see what I'm saying? The word senne doesn't mean thorn bush, as in a compound word of thorn bush. It actually means more like thorn. Or if you were to take what the dictionary definition says is that it comes from a root word meaning to prick. Um, then it means a pricker or a pricker or a thorn. Okay, in a literal what we would use in America, we say a pricker bush, right? Pricker bush, or we could just say there's a pricker over there, or there's a thorn. We have a lot of thorn in our yard, or something like that. If we want to refer to it. So the point is, it doesn't have the word bush. It has a word meaning thorn or pricker. The thing that pricks. Got it? Okay. Um, and this is interesting because in my goodness, there's so much material I didn't bring all together here for this, but um, even if you find cognate or theoretically related words in, for example, Akkadian and classical Syriac, um, they are not more frequently they are related to um, things that are not botanical. Okay, and the point is, this is a word that it doesn't necessitate that it is referring to bush. What it really contains within the word itself is a verb, an unused, what it says in the dictionary, an unused verb for to prick. Whereas shishna, the synonym of linga, is from a root meaning to pierce. Okay, so we have a coincidental through line of the root words here. I found in one Jewish dictionary that one Jewish dictionary says actually the definition of sena is prick. Okay, I didn't make this up, but it says prick and then bush. Um, so this gets the concept across, I hope. If you look at, for example, Klein Dictionary, it will say, for the definition of sena, it will say thorn, comma, bush. And again, just like in our language, thorn can refer, or prick rather, pricker. It can refer to botanical things, of course. It can refer to a bush. If you say the word thorn, it can refer to an individual thorn or to a bush that is called the thorn, and that sort of thing. So this is something worth looking into, in my opinion. That not only do we have the synonym shishna, it sort of is similar to the word sena. Shishna has other than differences. It has a similar sound to it, but also if someone was looking at what the linga does in the scene, when it appears, it pierces. Has this synonym that may have been used in older versions of the story that would have, as we see in the classical texts, classical Vedic texts, it's using the word shishna usually for phallic symbols. And that root word means to pierce. Obviously, also just in the word to prick or to pierce is contained a euphemistic register that is available there, which anyone can draw that connection themselves. So this may have just influenced what word was chosen, and I think that is worth considering, especially because the word sena, it only appears in the Bible in this scene, and then it appears in Deuteronomy as well. But it refers to it either refers back to just this scene, to the burning bush, or it refers to a certain mountain crag as its name. So that again, that other usage points to a non-botanical connection of sena, and although it could refer to there being bramble bushes, thorny bushes on that mountain. However, it could also refer to the sort of pointed nature, piercing or pricking nature of it. What is also interesting about this is that it's actually scholars have somewhat had a difficult time locating this exact bush, because sena supposedly literally means like a bramble bush, but those are not really located in this region. Instead, there are acacia type trees and bushes, slightly different than what the sena word should refer to, is how I understand it. So they say, oh, it's probably an acacia, but that isn't really the reference of what that specific word was chosen, what it could be related to, in terms of if it just meant like bramble, thorn. That supposedly refers to something more specific. The other thing is, it's just, this word is not, it's a specialized word. They have other words for bush. They have other words for acacia, which I think is shittim. The shittim wood is the other word. And there are multiple other words used throughout the Bible for bush. Suddenly in this scene, they've chosen an unused word elsewhere that then appears one other time, in Deuteronomy, or in one other context rather. Um, but in any case, it is said multiple times in this one scene, but not really elsewhere. And therefore, um, that is kind of the first context for what its meaning is. Therefore, it is inferred then by translators that it is referring to a bush based on that first reference in history. In this limited usage, it becomes a sort of circular interpretation of the word, where they're inferring that this must be a thorn bush, and then applying that sort of definition to it. And then in the Septuagint, it is translated with a word clearly meaning bush. Um, so that would raise another question, whether the person who wrote this down, the composer itself, himself or herself, who wrote this down, did they mean it to specifically be a bush, um, or did they just want it to be this sort of mystical word implying a thing that pricks, thing that pierces, or like, the thorn, this transcendent thorn, this burning thorn, rather than an actual bush, um, or were they already translating it into a bush symbol themselves because of the factor of sort of embarrassment? Um, did the word Shishna influence their choice of the word Sena, which means to prick, or yeah, and then did that get sort of softened and circularly interpreted as a bush, as it was translated to the Septuagint, and then on into the tradition, where that could have gotten solidified at an early stage, but nothing in the actual original Hebrew text makes definitive that it would have to be a bush. Yeah, or what do you think? Or you may think that it clearly is a bush. If it clearly is a bush, then I think just the factor of wanting to change it due to a factor of sort of uncomfortableness. We see this in other places that I've described in the biblical adaptations of material, where something strange or outlandish gets softened down in the biblical version, such as Dadhichi's head gets cut off and replaced with that of a horse's head, which kind of glows with light, and is the Vedic Dadhikra, which is like another version of the sacrificial horse head, is horned. So Moses is connected to this motif of the horned shining light, the rays of shining light of a horse's head. That was a bit too strange, I think, in the adaptation. So the horse's head was not retained in the wrestling match of Esau, or rather in the wrestling match of Jacob um, and God. There is some euphemizing of what could have been sexual material in the original version, as we see with Set and Horus. So there are certain moments where it seems like things were being made more conservative, and that sort of thing. But to me, the fire might look like a bush, it can prick. Yeah. In any case, I think you can say, whichever side you take. To me, I think I haven't seen enough evidence that this word has to mean bush in its original context, or even commonly related cognates before this time were always related to botanical things. So to me, it leaves open the possibility that the composer was using a more symbolic word that could be applied to pointed things. And so it was like he was saying this pointed thing, or this pricking thing appeared, and that could have been softened by redactors or other people in the tradition. The translators to the Septuagint could have more brought that over to meaning definitely bush afterwards. It makes sense to me. But yeah, I can understand if it seems like it's just an adaptation, even if it's just sort of a change, a softening. I think I think there's something in the original Linga symbolism that would have influenced their choice of the word Senna, which appears nowhere else. Okay, other than in Deuteronomy, as I said, and it's really this unused word with this specific why they chose this quote unquote thorn or thorn bush. Um, I think was influenced by what they saw in the Linga passage. Either way, okay. So I won't belabor that because again, I'm not a scholar of the languages, but these things have to be brought up regardless. And one other thing is from there we can look at the theophany of Moses, the theophany of Yahweh, when Moses asks to see his glory, because this ties together with the burning bush one in a way, but it also is, in my opinion, from a different source involving a different Indian god. But they're very interesting to look at side by side. So with that, I will pull up Exodus 33, where Moses asks to see the glory of God. Exodus 33. And this is similar to rather than a Shiva manifestation, this is similar to when Arjuna asks to see Krishna's glorious form. So I don't know if this one again, I wouldn't be surprised if someone has pointed this out, some scholar. But if you go to the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 11, so Exodus 33 and Bhagavad Gita, chapter 11. Okay. Moses. Then Moses asked to see God's glory. It's verse 18, chapter 33. Then Moses asked to see God's glory. The Lord replied, I will make my goodness pass before you, and I will announce to you the meaning of my name, Yahweh, the Lord. I show kindness and mercy to anyone I want, but you may not see the glory of my face, for man may not see me and live. However, stand here on this rock beside me. When my glory goes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed. Then I will remove my hand, and you shall see my back, but not my face. If you look at Bhagavad Gita, chapter 11, Arjuna said, having heard this supremely confidential spiritual knowledge which you, that is Krishna, have revealed out of compassion for me, my illusion is now dispelled. So Krishna has just explained to him his transcendent universal form. And so now Arjuna says, I've heard from you in detail about the appearance and disappearance of all living beings, O lotus-eyed one, and also about your eternal magnificence, as compared to glory, of course. O Supreme Lord, you are precisely what you declare yourself to be. Now I desire to see your divine cosmic form, O greatest of persons. O Lord of all mystic powers, if you think I am strong enough to behold it, then kindly reveal that imperishable cosmic form to me. The Supreme Lord said, behold, O Parth, my hundreds and thousands of wonderful forms of various shapes, sizes, and colors. Behold in me, O scion of the Bharatas, the 12 sons of Aditi, the 8 Vasus, the 11 Rudras, the twin Ashvini Kumars, as well as the 49 Maruts, and many more marvels never revealed before. Behold now, Arjun, the entire universe, with everything moving and non-moving assembled together in my universal form. Whatever else you wish to see, observe it all within this universal form. But you cannot see my cosmic form with these physical eyes of yours. Therefore I grant you divine vision. Behold my majestic opulence. Having thus spoken, Sri Krishna displayed his divine and opulent form to Arjun. In that cosmic form, Arjun saw unlimited faces and eyes, etc. He revealed himself as the wonderful and infinite Lord whose face is everywhere. If 1,000 suns were to blaze forth together in the sky, they would not match the splendor of that great form. There Arjun could see the totality of the entire universe established in one place. In that body of the God of gods, then Arjun, full of wonder, and with hair standing on end, bowed his head before the Lord and addressed him with folded hands. Arjun said, O Sri Krishna, I behold within your body all the gods and hosts of different beings. I see Brahma, etc., etc. Okay. I recognize you as the supreme imperishable being, the ultimate truth to be known by the scriptures. You are the support of all creation. Um, you are the everlasting supreme divine personality. You are without beginning, middle, or end. Your power has no limits. Your arms are infinite. The sun and the moon are like your eyes, and fire is like your mouth. I see you warming the entire creation by your radiance. O greatest of all beings, all the worlds are terror-stricken, and so am I. O Lord Vishnu, seeing your form touching the sky, effulgent in many colors with mouths wide open and enormous blazing eyes, my heart is trembling with fear. Having seen your many mouths, I forget where I am and do not know where to go. You are the shelter of the universe. Please have mercy on me. Reminds me of things spoken in Christian contexts. But yeah, in a way, this is again. In a way, this is a somewhat generic motif, right? We see Semele beg Zeus to reveal his form to her, but he only re- um, reveals a small part of himself to her, and that amount of himself causes her to burst into flames and perish. And so clearly, this kind of motif was known in the ancient world. There are probably even more versions from the ancient world of this particular thing that that have been lost and that were known at the time. So it was had a certain well-known quality to it. So for that reason, the Moses story doesn't have to be adapted from this for that reason. But I think there are reasons to think so. To think that this had some influence. Um, for one thing, just the extensive transcendental quality that we also see in the Shiva Theophany. Um, but then also just the fact that we know the Mahabharata is one of the main sources of a lot of these adaptations, okay, that we've seen with a lot of the Moses material where they are the turning of the waters to blood and different Vasishta related details could have been Mahabharata connected, but then also a lot of the Isaac and Jacob material, as well as certain details, possible details in the Abraham story. So yeah, the Mahabharata, at least the traditions that we find in the Mahabharata, in one form or another, were being used, it seems to me, along with this Puranic material. So therefore, if they were reading the Mahabharata, they may have known the Bhagavad Gita and known this scene. Again, it is Arjuna, the hero, the one fighting in the war, and he is begging the god to show his transcendental form, and he does, and he doesn't die like Semele does. Instead, he is protected by the god in a way by giving Krishna gives him special eyesight to see this form accurately, Yahweh protects Moses by putting him in a cleft in a rock and passing by in a safe way. So those are, of course, different as well. Um, but yeah, it is. There's enough there to consider the possibility that this was one of the sources of that scene, um, and there could have been others or they could have had just other ideas that made the differences in the Moses story. But if they had the Mahabharata, then they would have known this scene at the very least and had it in the back of their minds. Okay. Um, and so if that's true, then you would have this scene in Exodus being influenced by a Vishnu myth and the other one by a Shiva myth. And so that would be interesting as well if it's true. Yeah. Okay. One other point is that so Tamon or Tamon in a discussion yesterday, he mentioned how I think Reese, the scholars, had connected Avrian and Taliesin and the I statements that they make. So Avrian and Taliesin are connected to, they are Shiva type manifestations or names in the Celtic tradition. They're parallels of Shiva. And they make these I pronouncements where they say I am, the wave of the sea and the fish of the sea and a teardrop and whatever. I'm a bird flying in the sky. So they say the sequence of things where after saying this long list of things that I am, it is like they're saying they are identical with the cosmos in a way. It is a cosmic pronouncement, and they happen to be the Shiva type. And we saw in the Shiva texts that Shiva does very much say, "I am identical with all things." Okay, we saw versions of that, and we saw him say, "I am the Om, and the Om is all." But he doesn't do this listing where it's "I am" um, as emphatically. And we could see kind of the difference if you just look at those texts. It's very, very similar to what I just said, but Krishna even more so does this sort of I am thing in a repeated way, which Tamon pointed out. Uh, and so I wanted to look at that because that is the chapter right before this happens. So these are chapters back to back as well. So if the authors knew this, they would know that other chapter as well. So chapter 10. So in chapter 10, Krishna says, 10.8, I am the origin of all creation. Everything proceeds from me. The wise who know this perfectly worship me with great faith and devotion. Out of compassion for them who dwell within their hearts, destroy the darkness born of ignorance. And then I shall now briefly describe my divine glories to you. I am seated in the heart of all living entities. I am the beginning, middle, and end of all beings. I am Vishnu. Among luminous objects, I am the sun. Know me to be Marichi amongst the Maruts, and the moon amongst the stars in the sky. I am the Samaveda amongst the Vedas, and Indra amongst the celestial gods. Amongst the senses, I am the mind. Amongst the living beings, I am consciousness. Amongst the Rudras, know me to be Shankar. Amongst the semi-celestial beings and demons, I am Kuber. I am Agni amongst the Vasus and Meru amongst the mountains. O Arjun, amongst priests I am Brihaspati. Amongst warrior chiefs I am Kartikeya. And amongst reservoirs of water, know me to be the ocean. I am Brigu amongst the great seers, and the transcendental Om amongst sounds. Amongst chants, know me to be the repetition of the holy name. Amongst immovable things, I am the Himalayas. Amongst trees, I am the peepal tree, sacred fig tree. Of the celestial sages, I am Narad. Amongst the Gandharvas, I am Chitrath, and amongst the Siddhas I am sage Kapil. Um, I am the Vajra thunderbolt amongst weapons, and the Kamadhenu amongst the cows. I am Kamdev, the god of love, amongst all the causes for procreation. So he goes on and on about this, of course. Um, I am the beginning, middle, and end of all creation. I am the beginning A amongst all letters. I am the dual word in grammatical compounds. I am the endless time, and amongst creators I am Brahma. I am all devouring death. I am the origin of these things that are yet to be. I am the gambling of the cheats and the splendor of the splendid. I am the victory of the victorious, the resolve of the resolute, and the virtue of the virtuous. And so one of the points is sort of he's the essence or the best among certain categories, which is not always the case in the Taliesin, Avarian versions, where they're just sort of saying certain objects that aren't categorized in quite that way. But anyways, Tamon brought up this interesting possibility that this repetition of I am, could be connected to how Yahweh is the great I am. He says in that Exodus 3, so the other scene, and yeah, let's see, where is that verse? Tell them I am has sent me, of course, in verse 14 of Exodus 3. Okay, and so yeah, the I am is driven home very much in this Krishna version from the Bhagavad Gita, which they might have known to be influenced in Exodus 33 and influenced by the Mahabharata elsewhere. And then also we saw Shiva saying similar things in different form in his texts. And so it would make sense to me that there could have been, if they're just reading both of these versions of Theophanies, even the burning bush scene could have taken resonances from the Krishna scene and vice versa, or even just this concept of the I am and how the name of Yahweh is supposed to be interpreted, connecting it to I am and transcendent being. Those seem like open possibilities, at least. Yeah. It is more like in the Shiva version, it's more like he says, "Thus they call me Om." It's a little more passive, and it's more like the descriptive passages themselves describe what he is, and that he is identical with all these things, and then he is lauded by Brahma and Vishnu in different ways, where they list off some of what he is, how great he is. Right. So, yeah, you can see how that's a little bit different. But both cases really drive home that this God is existence, is what is, and transcends what is. So both of them hold that theology of a transcendental Godhead that is beyond and that has a glorious theophany that can appear and cause awe, and has these specific narrative motifs in the way it manifests, which we see then in these two Exodus scenes. So I think, uh, especially with the burning bush scene, I think it's clear that they were working from this Indic material, and in the other scene, it's a strong possibility that they had that as well, and there could have been integrating this. They could have been using this to even to even come up with a mystical way to reinterpret the name Yahweh at this moment. So this is another interesting question: is they if they're reading these texts and they see the I am. Well, I think that's different, James Fields, because it's English. Anyways, but they connect, of course. Being I am and being yes, they definitely connect. The is true, the true absolute and the true reality, right? But it's not, but not there wouldn't be the English resonance there. But they do have they do overlap in what they mean. When Krishna says, I am this, and this, he then says, I am the also. They are both making essentially the same claim that I am the true absolute reality. But in any case, if they had these texts, these theologies, they're looking at these, the writers of Exodus, they're looking at these, this theology existed in Indic texts, clearly. It's possible that they then looked at the name Yahweh and they saw how Aum was interpreted by breaking it apart into three pieces and giving mystical significance to each of the three components. It could be that they then took the name Yahweh and just came up with a way to analyze that into three parts and invented a mystical interpretation of Yahweh that came out as Ehya Asher Ehya, or however the mystical level layers could have just been inspired by what they saw being done in these texts in a more elaborate way, and then the composers could have, that could be a later addition, or it could be something in their own mystical traditions, right? Where they already had a mystical version of Yahweh and it dovetailed into this in some way. But I do think that the triplicity, the fact that Yahweh breaks his name into three, Ehya, Asher, Ehya, matching the Aum breaking into Aum, which has individual, three mystical significances, is very coincidental. It seems like a direct borrowing of that idea, which you don't see everywhere. You do not see that everywhere. Okay, that has to be reiterated. That this is not just some ubiquitous thing. There is a general ubiquitous concept of a theophany of a god, but not in this exact of a form. And yeah, one thing I want to get across is that there's a reason that all these motifs of the Hebrew Bible stand out as having a uniqueness to them in their milieu, in their geographical surroundings in Mesopotamia. There's something about them that actually is not like other Mesopotamian mythology. Okay, and this is one of the problems. Clearly, there is Mesopotamian mythological influence and similarities, but there are a lot of things that I've pointed to that are not. There's something about Hebrew story, the biblical stories, that are not explicable from Mesopotamian surroundings, and for that reason makes them seem unique, makes them seem have this weird special mystical quality to them that we don't see, or more sophisticated, more whatever. And those exact things appear in these Indian texts and motifs. And so that has to be driven home, that it's closer to Indian concepts, and they are not actually this type of theophany with all this, with what I pointed to. It's not ubiquitous everywhere. You can only really draw a line in the way I have between this and the Indian texts, even though you can find a more broad, loose concepts of theophany anywhere, and I'm sure they knew other versions of that. But this triple name vibrating from a stable, unconsuming fire within a fiery theophany that embodies all transcendent existence. It's very specific, and I hope that is clear. Yeah. Any other questions or things we should go into before I wrap this up? Yahweh is Shiva, and maybe Shekinah is Parvati. So, yeah, it's an interesting question, and I do want to drive home that what I'm saying is, it seems to me like Yahweh was their god a lot earlier. They already had the god Yahweh, basically, and they got texts at some point, and that's the big question: is when? I think they acquired Indian texts, and they used them in the composition of the Hebrew Bible, specifically in this stretch of stories. A certain amount of their stories, doesn't mean everything, but that they just inserted Yahweh into these stories rather than Yahweh being originally the same as Shiva. So Yahweh could have been a completely different god type. A lot of people connect him just to like a warrior type god, but it's nobody really knows. And so let's just say he was a Indra type or a Vishnu type or something, whatever. Then he, or excuse me, then at whatever point later on when they're composing the Bible stories, they adapt Indian stories and plug in Yahweh and reinterpret Yahweh's name in a mystical way that aligns with the triplicity of the Aum motif that we saw. Yeah, and that's how they compose the stories. They give the Indian stories to Yahweh in a monotheistic way. This seems more plausible because they're just signs of conflating and combining things compositionally. They're compositional signs that would point in that direction. Like the Song of the Sea parallel that we went into yesterday was an Indra myth. The one we're discussing today was a Shiva myth, and then also a Krishna myth. So if they were taking these whatever and boiling them all down into one, then whoever Yahweh was originally was not all of those. He had to be a certain type originally, at least typologically speaking. And so yeah, that is complicated but important to get across. Yeah. So to me, one of the most interesting questions is just when the influx of Indian material happened. And one thing is that, okay, we have the concept of Alexandria, and this seems like a point in time we can pinpoint very strongly. There was activity, they had books, they had composition happening. And it's sort of like a terminus ad quem, and they had to have had something composed by around this time for the Septuagint translation, theoretically. So, yeah. So, Alexander the Great in the 320s, had been in India and had opened pathways of trade to India, and even had been in contact with Indian sages, as is well documented, and even legendarily or historically, who knows, had a specific sage that he brought with him from India to go with him on his further journeys. And so, yeah, he had contact with Indian sages, Indian wisdom, and kind of open pathways for those to flow. And we don't really know, books would have been lost from that time who had what, but it opens that pathway for knowledge to come through. And so the question is whether that happened very late, like right around 270. The books being acquired by the composers of the Hebrew Bible, or did it happen at an earlier point, and there had already been like a community among the Jews who were knowledgeable in Indian texts and wisdom, and then they came together to compose this thereafter. Um, so yeah, that's the interesting question for me right now. To me, it seems like with how exact the Song of the Sea parallel is yesterday, I hope that drives home that direct Indian influence has to be taken extremely seriously, rather than this being Indo-Iranic or even just Mitanni. Although those are still open possibilities, I don't close off any possibilities if something can explain that. But when you see this is Puranic material and Mahabharata material. It is, I don't know, it just is very specific to Indian culture. This scene of Shiva and the fiery theophany, it's specific to Indian mythology as we know it. The Song of the Sea, or the Battle of Ten Kings hymn, it's specific to Indian mythology. The sages, Vasishta and Dadhichi and Vishwamitra, that type of sage and what they do and those motifs are unique to Indian mythology. We have tales of sages in um, Avestan and in Indo-Iranic, or rather Persian. In Iranic texts, we have stories of Zarathustra, Zoroaster, and other sages, and there's a reason no one has connected motifs this precisely to Iranic sources before, because they don't exist, to my knowledge, to this degree of closeness. It just kind of tells you that these are Indian type stories. The trick of the blind king, um, that we see incorporated into the story of Isaac and Jacob, where the blind king's son tricks him in order to disinherit his rival from the kingship, and then one of them is exiled and then comes back and becomes the real king. Uh, the blind king trick, that motif is from the Mahabharata, the Indian epic, and it is not found in that way, in that form, in the Shahnameh, the Iranic epic. So we have the Iranic epic, we have the Iranic legends in the epic forms, things like that, and they do not match in the way that these motifs match to Indian sources, not even close. And so direct Indian influence has to be taken very seriously. And so then we have to ask when it happened. So yeah, I think just the idea that they just got trade, they got some texts is one possibility, right before, leading up to 270, whenever it happened. But I did think it was interesting that we'll just end on a speculative note, because none other than Aristotle, supposedly, according to his pupil, his own pupil, I think Cleanthes or something, said that Aristotle says that the Jews are Indians. Okay? Um, and that, let's see. Mm-hmm. Kalani. So, according to Flavius Josephus, he says that Clearchus, the pupil of Aristotle himself, reported that Aristotle believed the Indians, or the Jews, were Indians themselves. Yeah, so it's just very striking that he would say that. It's Aristotle. This is Aristotle. This isn't just anybody, and it's his own pupil saying this, according to Josephus. I don't know why. Anything that could be made up, but I don't know why that would be. Aristotle was there with Alexander the Great himself. Aristotle was the guy who knew everything. Aristotle saw the Jews and said, apparently, that they are Indians. And here we find that the majority of their myths are Indian source, have an Indian source. The majority of this stretch of myths, okay, the ones from Abraham to Moses, their stories. And um, he says that Aristotle said they were from the tribe called Kalani. And if you look at this word Kalani, some believe it is the same as Kalanus, or it is a reference to Kalanus. Kalanos. Kalanos was the name of the Indian sage that Alexander encountered in India when he went there and took with him. So Alexander took this sage, Kalanus, with him to be his personal teacher. He was the teacher of Alexander himself and went back and eventually became unwell in some way as he aged and decided to commit ritual suicide. And when he was committing ritual suicide, he chanted Vedic hymns. So he's a Vedic, he's probably from Brahmanical society. Brahmanical society is exactly where these stories are coming from. The set of myths we've looked at are from the classical Vedic age or post-classical. If you classify Puranas as post-classical age, like the second half of the first millennia BC. It's just strange. It's just strange. You have Vedic sage named Kalanos, teacher of Alexander. Aristotle, Alexander's other teacher, Aristotle says that the Jews are the Kalani. Okay, why? Why is this? Why does this exist? And so I'm wondering, it's just strange. And then Megasthenes is the other famous commentator. I think Megasthenes was he the one who went with Alexander as well? But he wrote about India, and he was a Greek ambassador, and went to India, to the Punjab, and he documented things around this time. He died in 290. Okay, so right around, he was at the same time, Hellenistic period, contemporary with these others, basically. Although maybe he was after Alexander died. I'm not quite sure. Yeah. So yeah. I think after Alexander died. So and it's interesting because Megasthenes describes the Jews, but he dies in 290. Okay, that's before the 270 kind of idea, and he's already written about India and what he knows. And he says that the wise, the philosopher people that are of note are anyways, he names like three groups of people, and he names the Jews and the Indians. So the point is, he names the Jews alongside the Indians as sophisticated philosophical people. So it's an idealized reference to them among like the top three philosophical peoples, but that is pre 290 BC. That is by someone who knows India at the time. Therefore, it makes me wonder. It just makes me wonder if they were so philosophical and sophisticated before 270, why would they need to adapt all these Indian texts later to give themselves the sophistication that they lacked. It seems like there are things pointing to the possibility that they had Indian philosophical influx earlier. It's a possibility, and there are other things I think that make that seem unlikely as well. There are things that seem like they just got these texts later, in 270 or leading up to 270, and there are a lot of signs of composition and signs of them combining stories in a way that an outsider would and not an insider, combining stories of demons with stories of gods to make their version of the story, theoretically, combining, like I mentioned, the story of Duryodhana, who is the incarnated demon Kali, combining that with the story of like Yudhishthira slash Horus, like the good sovereign figure, combining that into and to make Jacob Israel. So now they've created their namesake hero out of demonic and God stories in a sort of haphazard way. It's very literally done very well, to make a literary unit out of it. But why would people who had inherited that, who were actually Indian, had actual Indian influx, treat the material that way? Is my other question. So, anyways, I would love if there was more information to look at why Aristotle said that, why Megasthenes said that, because it opens a possibility that maybe they just already were reading Plato, and they were already highly philosophized, maybe, highly cosmopolitan already leading up to that era, and that just made it an easy transition to then adapt more Indian texts when they got a hold of them. Maybe, yeah, there was just an affinity. But what if they got Indian texts, or even Indian travelers or teachers or something, kind of that in that way, at an earlier stage, in the Persian period or something like that. But that, to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense either, because yeah, the Persians were opposite to Indian teachings in a lot of ways, and it wouldn't be the most natural source. That's all. So yeah, a lot of mysteries still that we have no idea about, basically. The other thing to look at is, did some Indians come over when Yahweh first appeared, way back when, and become the original Israelites? We may never know about that, and that seems unlikely as well. But yeah, what do you guys speculate? Any final thoughts, questions? Exactly. Knowledge is a gradual thing. So that's a good ending note. But clearly, the mentions by Megasthenes, the works of Megasthenes, who documents India, and he was an ambassador to India at that time, bringing back knowledge. Alexander himself bringing back at least one Vedic sage. There's so much that is not told about what happened around that, but it tells you that the pathways were opened at that time, that they were opened by Alexander the Great, and who knows if there was ever some opening at an earlier century where Indian knowledge could have come down. But for these reasons, I think that the direct Indian influence has to be very seriously considered. What we're looking at with this burning bush parallel is Puranic tradition. So what has to be envisioned is a proto, like Shiva / Vayu Purana. So like we saw the Vayu Purana and the Shiva Purana, very similar, and probably branched off of a single source very anciently. Puranas are just compilations of the oral traditions that had been going on, and that we can see from other points went back to Proto-Indo-European and all of that. The Also, it should be noted the pillar of fire that is all existence, transcendent existence, is usually traced back to the Vedas themselves with the Skamba pillar that represents Brahman. Okay, so it's the cosmic pillar called the fulcrum of existence. It appears in the Atharva Veda in a lengthy hymn to the Skamba. Maybe we should just close with the Skamba hymn. How about that? Atharva Veda. So it's book 10, hymn 7, and take this. Okay, so it's interesting. It is not like a pillar of fire, so we could then theorize that the pillar of fire imagery is solely found in the Puranas, giving more reason to think this is being copied directly from the Purana version, but just understanding that it has deeper roots as well in the Vedic tradition. So this concept of the pillar, it's not it is not something that was just appeared only in Indian tradition later. It wasn't like borrowed from the Exodus story or something, because it has acknowledged roots. The Purana tradition seems scholars believe it was starting up around the 3rd century BC or something. They don't know. They really don't know, because it was an ongoing tradition that probably went back, like I said. But signs of it, because it's being referred, the Vayu Purana itself is referred to in the Mahabharata. The Shvet Ashvatara Upanishad marks sort of the beginning, the earliest signs of Shiva monism. If you look up Shvet Ashvatara Upanishad, and that dates from Upanishadic periods around the 5th to 4th century BCE. Okay, so Shiva monism, they believe, based on this textual trace of the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, has historical signs, it has textual signs that seem to go back to at least the 4th century BCE or so, 5th century BCE. And those draw from a dense web of stories that already existed in the Brahmanas and that already existed in the Rig Veda, like I mentioned. Dadhichi himself is mentioned in the Rig Veda multiple times, as is the Dadhikra horse that has the horns of light. And yeah, the Song of the Sea is in the Rig Veda. All of these things have roots in the Rig Veda in a broader sense. And then, of course, the Atharva Veda has the Skamba, the pillar of all existence. So this is where that the very idea that this cosmic pillar is the transcendent absolute that is beyond being and existence itself. It is drawing from this Skamba tradition and this other complex oral traditions that were along with it. So it says, Atharva Veda 10.7, which of his members is the seat of fervor? Which is the base of ceremonial order? Where in him standeth faith? Where holy duty? Where in what part of him is truth implanted? Out of which member glows the light of Agni? So that is fire. So fire glows out of him. From which proceeds the breath of Matarishvan? From which doth Chandra measure out his journey, traveling over Skamba's body? Which of his members is the earth's upholder? Which gives the middle air a base to rest on? So even this series of questions, which is this, which is that, it's similar to when the transcendent God says, I am the this, I am that, I am this, I am that, but in a mystical question form instead, coming from the other angle. So that's interesting. I should also say the Skamba of heaven is in the Rig Veda too. It's found in a couple places, and it says skamba of heaven, basically. But because there is not a lot of context around it, um, scholars don't think, scholars assume that it is just means a standard pillar, basically. But it says, but these mentions in the Rig Veda say, what is that skamba of heaven that allows the sun to go flying through the sky, um, up, up, up without falling down, or goes down, down, down through the sky without tumbling to the ground. And what is that skamba of heaven that gives the power to the moon itself in the sky and the soma? So and it's using this question format that is reserved for mystical subjects. Okay, mystical objects. And as we see in the skamba, it's repeatedly, what is that skamba? What is this? What is this thing? That is how the absolute is typically treated in the Vedas, even in the creation hymn of the Rig Veda, where it's the end of that hymn ends on a question, a mystical question about not even understanding what is beyond. And that questioning is here throughout this hymn. It is found, the skamba of heaven that's in the Rig Veda is treated with this questioning format. So that makes me think, yes, it is referring to the absolute skamba. And it is the power that holds up the sun and the power of the soma moon as well. So it's common to sun and moon, not reducible to either of them, but it is like this skamba, this pillar of the sky that undergirds, supports everything, including the power of sun and moon. And when we refer to it, we ask, what is that? How can I understand that? Which, again, that goes back to how Moses reacts to the burning bush and how Brahma and Vishnu react to the linga, trying to comprehend it and not being able to. So that is all there in this tradition. So which of his members is the earth's upholder? In which member is the sky established? Whitherward yearning blazeth Agni upward, that is fire. Whitherward yearning bloweth Matarishvan. Okay, how far did skamba penetrate within it? What portion did he leave unpenetrated? So penetration, it's not an accident that this is attributed to what the pillar does, just like the linga, when it appears, it pierces, and shishna comes from a root meaning to pierce. And I think that feeds into sena, to prick, being chosen for the word for the bush, which it's entirely possible it was not restricted to meaning bush by the sort of the mystic who composed the adaptation. I think that's also worth considering, because we see mysticism from the Indian texts embedded in strange ways in the Exodus stories. It's not like they threw it out. Like in the story of Abraham and his wife, and the Pharaoh, and why he allows his wife to go with the Pharaoh for a while, and that sort of thing. That was actually encoding the Varuna Praghasa ritual of the Shatapatha Brahmana, which was a magical ritual to create a sort of lightning rod of magical divine power to bless the family and the offspring for the future. That is encoded in and left in that story, in my opinion. So I think they're encoding these mystical concepts in the words they choose, and that's what led to the bush imagery coming secondarily. I think it's sort of, whether it was there in the final product of the first composer, or whether it was just read into the word sena by interpreters saying this must mean bush. I think in the first use of that word sena, it comes back to this concept that this is the piercing thing. This is the penetrating thing. This is the thing that pricks, the thing that is like a thorn. The thorn itself is, if you picture the thorn individually, it is like a penetrating item, like similar to a linga, similar to concept of Shishna and all of that sort of thing. I want to pull up. Okay, so I don't know what this is from. I'm gonna send this. Hmm. Okay, one moment, and I will. Last thing, I swear. Okay, so you can see here, this is the definition of senna. So you guys know that I'm not making up this wild speculation that I'm suggesting. This is a Hebrew dictionary. The first meaning is actually prick of senna, because it comes from a word meaning to prick, and that's all it means, is a thing that pricks. So the translation would be a pricker or prick or thorn, and from that is extrapolated or inferred the meaning thorn bush, but that is secondary. It's an inference, and then it can be applied to a bush, just like the word thorn can imply a bush in our language, or pricker can. But the word itself, if taken as a mystical name, what it encodes is the meaning of to prick. Okay, so that's enough said about that. And yeah, I think this is right. I think that's what happened. But if you don't, I understand and I respect that. Okay, so he who knows him who is supreme, and he who knows the Lord of life, those know the loftiest power divine, and thence know Skamba thoroughly. He who out of many tell me is that Skamba, of whom Vaishvanara became the head, the Angirasas his eye, and Yatus his corporeal parts. So I think Vaishvanara is another Agni name. So there's a lot of Agni names attached to the Skamba, that is fire name. So it is potentially a fiery pillar that also penetrates, and then it sort of has its manifestation as it has like a smaller version of itself that is called the reed in the waters. So that he verily knows the reed of gold that stands amid the flood. He verily who knows the reed of gold that stands amid the flood is the mysterious Lord of life. And so that's just another pillar image. It is another name of the Skamba is this golden reed standing amid the waters. Interesting image of the pillar. Also, botanical image, interesting. So yeah, anyways, this hymn clearly describes it as containing within himself being and non-being as well. Let's see. The waters. Who out of many, tell me, is that Skamba, in whom men recognize the waters and Brahma, in whom they know the worlds and their enclosures, in whom are non-existence and existence. Okay, so I'll conclude with that this transcendent pillar was part of Vedic tradition from the Vedas, with this lengthy hymn to the pillar, which is also the golden reed or fiery, the pillar that embodies Agni and Vaishvanara, as I mentioned, but also all existence and non-existence, as it said. The waters and Brahma. That is like the waters are the manifest, the symbol rather of non-being, and Brahma is the symbol of the embodiment of being, and the worlds, and then you have non-existence and existence. That is the Skamba. He is all. So we see that Shiva Purana theology in the Vedas themselves, just not with Shiva named. And then we see Shiva monism appearing in around the 5th century or so with the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, but that's just the historical trace of it. It doesn't mean, these things have through lines, is my point, going back deep into Vedic texts and Vedic tradition. So yeah, thanks for coming in and participating in the stream today, and I have to get going. So I hope that was clear in parts and thought-provoking in other parts. All right, that's all.